The call came in broken. A patrol on the wire road, an IED, casualties unknown, possible contact. PFC Eli Brandt heard it through the canvas wall of the aid station and felt the floor of his stomach drop, the way it always did before the math started. How many liters, how many hands, how much time he'd have before the answer to all three stopped matching. Outpost Farron sat at the bottom of a dry wash with a single gravel road running through it like a stitch holding the valley together, and the aid station was four canvas walls and a generator that coughed more than it ran. Eli had been here 11 weeks. He still wasn't used to how fast quiet turned into this. The way a morning could be coffee and boot laces and radio static, and then, with no warning at all, become the only thing that mattered for the rest of a man's life. 3 days. That was how long the new medic had been at Farron, and in 3 days Eli had heard her say maybe 40 words. SBC Reese Calder kept her eyes down, her boots laced tight, her cot made before anyone else's. Staff Sergeant Bo Hollis had taken one look at her transfer paperwork. 6 months at a rear logistics hub, no combat tour listed, quiet to the point of strange, and decided what she was for. Vitals and intake, Hollis told her the first morning, not unkindly, just final. I'm not putting somebody untested on a chest. You'll log them, you'll triage color tag, you hand off to me or Brandt for anything past a sprain. Calder had nodded once and gone to set up the intake table like she'd done it 100 times, which Eli thought she probably had, just never on anyone who mattered. There had been one small thing, the second day, that Eli had almost missed. A soldier had come through with a twisted ankle and a penicillin allergy nobody had bothered to log, and Calder had caught it from across the tent before Hollis reached for the wrong kit. Said it quietly, once, and let him take the credit when he corrected himself. Eli had filed it away as luck. He understood now that it hadn't been. Now the radio was screaming, and Hollis was already moving, snapping out assignments. Brandt, litters at the gate. Calder, intake log, color tags only, nothing past your table. She didn't argue. She never argued. The first vehicle came through the wire at a dead run, horn flat against the gate guard's shouted challenge, and what came out of it told Eli everything he needed to know about how bad this was going to be. 5 men down. Sergeant Wick Halloran with his chest going wrong in a way Eli had only read about. Breath sound gone on one side. Neck veins standing up like rope, lips already going the wrong color. Specialist Doyle Caro with a leg laid open at the thigh, the bleeding too fast and too dark to be anything but arterial. A third man, Private Tomas Reyna, gray and silent in a way that worried Eli more than the ones who were shouting. 2 more behind them, walking wounded who wouldn't stay walking long. Hollis took one look at Halloran, and his hands went still for half a second too long. The half-second Eli would remember for the rest of his life, because in it, Calder was already moving. She didn't run. That was the thing Eli noticed even through his own panic. She crossed the tent at a fast, level walk like she had all the time in the world and none of it to waste. She had a chest seal flagged before Hollis finished saying the word pneumo, and when the seal didn't buy enough room, she didn't hesitate over it, didn't call for the senior medic to confirm. She found her landmark by feel, said hold him still in a voice with no shake anywhere in it, and put a 14-gauge needle into the second intercostal space like she'd done it under worse light than this. The hiss when it released was the loudest thing Eli had heard all year, and Halloran's color started coming back before the needle was even taped down. Tourniquet, high and tight. Now, she said to Eli, not looking up, already moving to Caro leg, and his hands found the strap before his brain caught up to giving the order. She had a junctional tourniquet seated above the wound in under a minute, calling out blood pressure numbers and color changes like she was reading off a checklist nobody else in the tent had ever been handed. Reyna was the one that worried her. Eli could see it. The gray color, the thin pulse. She pressed 2 fingers to his wrist, said a number under her breath, and looked up at the 2 soldiers still standing by the door. Either of you O negative? I need warm blood in him in the next 10 minutes, or he doesn't make the helicopter. One man rolled up his sleeve without being asked twice. She had the field transfusion line running before Hollis had finished securing Halloran's seal, working 2 patients at once with the same unhurried economy. like her hands had simply decided there was no version of this they couldn't keep up with. Eli would think, later, that this was the moment he should have understood. Not the rifle, not the radio, just the sight of her hands moving like the rest of the tent was standing still around them. But at the time, there was no room in him for anything except keeping his own grip steady on Caroline. Hollis stood over Halloran's chest seal with his jaw working and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. He had told her vitals and intake. She had just done in 4 minutes what would have taken every hand in the tent 15 and saved the order of it besides. That was when the shout came from the wire. A figure had come through the gap by the generator shed. Nobody's fault. The wire there had been cut for repair since morning, and the lone watching private had his eyes on the gate, not the seam, and he was inside the perimeter with a rifle low and ready before anyone but Calder turned to look. He was 30 feet from the tent flap. He was looking at the wounded laid out in rows like he understood exactly what kind of target that made them. Eli froze with the tourniquet strap still in his fist. Hollis froze with his hand on Halloran's seal. Calder didn't. She said without raising her voice, "Brant, hold Caro pressure. Don't let go of that line." And she was already walking, not toward a weapon because there wasn't one close enough, but toward the man at an angle that put her between him and the litters, her hands open and low and her face as calm as it had been over the chest seal. He swung the rifle toward her and shouted something none of them caught. She closed the last 6 feet faster than Eli's I could track, took the barrel offline with one forearm, broke his grip at the trigger guard with the other, and had him face down in the dirt with the weapon stripped clear before he'd finished understanding what had happened to him. She didn't strike him again once he was down. She didn't say a word to him at all. She zip-tied his wrists, looked up once to confirm the private had a rifle on him now, and walked back to Carol Legg like she'd stepped out for water. "Pressure?" she asked Eli. "Holding," he managed. "Good." She checked the tourniquet, checked the transfusion line on Reyna, nodded once, and moved to the 5th casualty without breaking stride. Hollis found his voice somewhere in the next 90 seconds, mostly to call for the radio. "I need priority medevac, 5 urgent surgical, 1 tension pneumo stabilized, 1 junctional tourniquet, 1 running blood, possible hostile contained at the wire." He read off the grid with hands that weren't quite steady. The response that came back wasn't the usual flat acknowledgement. It came back fast, and it came back with a question in a Hollis didn't expect. "Outpost Farron, confirm. Do you have a medic on station identifying as call sign far line?" "Confirm immediately. This is priority." Hollis looked at the radio like it had spoken in a foreign language. He looked at Calder, who had gone very still over the 5th casualty's wound, her hands steady on the dressing, her eyes somewhere far away for exactly 1 breath before she came back to the room. "That's me," she said, quiet even. "Tell them far line confirms. Tell them I need that bird in the air now, not in 10 minutes. Hollis keyed the radio with a hand that had stopped being entirely his own. "Confirmed. Far line is on station." "Repeat, far line is here." Whatever came back on the other end made the radio operator at the relay station audible even from 6 feet away. A held breath, a low copy that, and then a flurry of priority traffic that bumped every other call in the sector ahead of it. Eli didn't understand the name. He understood the way the air in the tent changed when Hollis heard it, the way his shoulders dropped an inch, the way he looked at the quiet woman who'd spent 3 days on intake duty like he was seeing her, actually seeing her for the first time since she'd walked through the gate. The bird came in low and fast, kicking up a wall of dust that the litter teams worked through with their faces wrapped, and the flight surgeon was off the ramp before the skids had fully settled, scanning the casualties with the particular urgency of someone counting seconds instead of minutes. Major Ines Driscoll took 1 look at the chest seal, 1 look at the junctional tourniquet, 1 look at the running transfusion line, and 1 look at the woman directing the load sequence with quiet, economical hand signals, and stopped cold in the rotor wash. "Far line." She said it like a name she'd given up hoping to hear again. "They told me Firebase Ander took the program with it. They told me there wasn't anybody left who knew that protocol." "There was one," Calder said, and went back to directing the litter teams onto the bird because the work wasn't finished and the work came first. Driscoll didn't argue with that either. She helped load the last litter herself. then turned and rendered a salute on the open ramp, in the dust and the rotor wash, in front of every soldier on that landing zone who could still stand to see it. And Hollis, who 3 hours earlier had told a quiet woman with no combat tour on her paperwork that she wasn't trauma-ready, stood at the edge of the LZ a long moment before his hand found its way to his own cover and held there, steady, until the bird had lifted clear and banked east toward the surgical hospital. It was 3 days before the rest of it came down through channels, and when it did, it came down whole. Lieutenant Colonel Dorian Castell stood in front of the gathered medics at the main post with a folder that had taken 2 signatures and a phone call to a classified desk to release, and read it without softening a word of it. Sergeant First Class Reese Calder, her true rank, sealed since the day she'd earned it, had completed the Joint Special Operations Combat Medic course at the top of a class that had washed out 2/3 of its candidates, and 3 years later had been the only medical asset left standing through the collapse of Firebase Ander. 3 hours and 11 minutes under direct fire. 9 men carried out alive from a position the after-action report had marked unsurvivable. The program had quietly written her file away after that, the way it did with the ones it couldn't risk losing twice, and posted her somewhere nobody would think to ask a second time. Castell pinned the Special Operations Combat Medic tab back onto her uniform himself, in front of the whole company, and said the only thing that needed saying, that the United States Army did not run out of people like her. It only ran out of places willing to admit, out loud, that it still had one. He added, quieter, almost to himself, but loud enough that the front rows heard it too, that a sealed file was meant to keep a soldier safe, not invisible, and that somewhere along the way somebody had let the second thing happen to her by accident. He said it would not happen again on his watch. Eli Brandt stood in the back row and watched her take it the same way she'd taken the chest seal and the tourniquet and the man at the wire, steady, level. No triumph anywhere in her face, just the quiet patience of someone who had never once needed the room to know what she was. He thought about the 40 words in 3 days, the made-up cot, the intake table she'd set up on her first morning like she'd done it 100 times before. Afterward, when the formation broke and the others drifted toward the mess hall, Calder found him by the water trailer and said the longest thing he'd ever heard her say. You held that line steady the whole time. Most trainees don't. Hollis was right to keep new hands off a chest until he'd seen them under fire. He just didn't know yet whose hands he was talking about. Then she nodded once, the same nod she'd given 100 times over 100 dressings, and walked off toward the barracks before he could find an answer. She had, just never on anyone who mattered, until the day everyone did, and she carried 5 of them out alive to prove it, and asked for nothing back but the next casualty in line.